Greetings, everybody. Chris Hislop from the Montana World Affairs Council. Welcome to another episode of Global Perspectives on Security, where we meet with our friend Mick Mulroy, the co-director at the Lobo Institute in Whitefish, Montana, to talk about the day's events, particularly with regard to global security matters. And as we have been talking about Ukraine for a year and a half now, Mick, we're going to keep going. Before we kick off, I just want to thank once again our very generous sponsors at the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Allegiance, Stockman Bank, and Clearwater Credit Union, who help us bring this and so many more programs to you. So Mick Mulroy up there in Whitefish, looks like a beautiful day, and there's a lot going on in Ukraine as always. I think I'd like to kick it off with a question to you, which is the latest strand of the dynamic within Ukraine is the counteroffensive continues. There seems to be a part of this where those in Europe, some in North America, are saying it's not necessarily succeeding. It looks like a stalemate. Ukrainians may not agree with that. What are we to believe here, Mick?
So great to be with you, Chris. I think part of the problem is there was too high of expectations set for what this counteroffensive could do and how quickly it could do it. The Russians have been digging in. They have a defense in depth with multiple minefields, 3 layers of very significant obstacles, barriers, fighting positions that the Ukrainians have to fight through. And they have to fight through it without air superiority and, quite frankly, not all the breaching material that's needed to do it. Just to be really frank, there's not a lot of militaries in the world that would even attempt this. So I think that should be stated up front. With that, the Ukrainians actually have made some gains. I think to be, fully do an analysis of this, that they started with too many axes of advance. They've now probed to the point where they feel like they can force through the Russians' line, and they did. So they've broken through one of the first lines of defenses, and they've taken over this town called Robotyne. Robotyne is significant in that it's en route to several other towns that could lead them to the Sea of Azov and could cut off the Russian, what we call the ground line of communication. So basically all the logistics, the ammunition, and everything that they need that goes to Crimea that they can't get over the bridge would go through there. And that would be a very strategic victory for the Ukrainians. They're not there yet, but they are making progress. And I think we should recognize the difficulty they had doing this and the fact that they are making gains. It's not as fast as we would like. It's certainly not as fast as Ukrainians would like, but it is progressing. And we also have to point out that when this started, a lot of the same people who are criticizing this counteroffensive had Russia taking Ukraine, the entirety of it, within weeks. So we're now talking about the incremental progress of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And I think if you look at the picture as a whole, it is a good place for Ukraine. It is a bad place strategically and operationally for the Russians.
So, Mick, as the war continues, of course, external forces are weighing in on it, not the least of which is the American election cycle. We saw an initial Republican debate a couple weeks ago, and a lot of discussion about American support and American budget allocations to support Ukraine militarily, for budget support, for humanitarian aid, and so on. Mick, what does the situation on the ground today hold for the discussion within America? What are we, as voters, as Americans, what should we be thinking as we head into this election cycle?
So as you know, I don't do politics, but I do national security. And I would like to say the old adage that politics ends at the water's edge. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. But what that was meant in the past was we can have our internal differences, if you will, about domestic politics. But in order for us to be as strong as we want to be in the world, we need to be unified when it comes to our foreign policy. I understand that's easier said than done. But when it comes to this specifically, I'd like to point out that this is not charity. I don't think there's anything wrong with supporting a partner in the sense that it's morally and ethically correct, but isn't just that. We have an enormous defense budget, which I agree with. Every dime we put into Ukraine depletes our second most capable adversary in Russia. That was a national security strategy in multiple administrations, identifies them right under China as the most significant threat to the United States. The Ukrainians, over the course of this, 19 going on 20 months, have depleted the Russian military up to 50%, right? So no matter how many aircraft, tanks, aircraft carriers we buy, the whole purpose is to be able to defend the United States. And if our identified adversaries, are getting less capable, it means we are more capable. So if you look at it that way, this is not a charitable event. This is us looking after a partner, but also looking after the national security interest of the United States. And I think that's where those that are talking about this need to focus. They need to talk more about the why and less about the what. All American public hears is billions this, billions that. I think we would be better served. We, the people, the individuals who support the Ukrainian effort, would be better served if we explain to the American people why this is important, not just to be a good partner, but also to look out for American interests, all of our interests.
Mick, shifting now to the global stage, we have the G20 upcoming. We know that President Xi has decided not to join. But I'll just by way of quick background is that there has been throughout this entire conflict some extraordinary geopolitics and diplomacy. We have a kind of European and North American and other NATO alliance that is held incredibly fast, despite calls that it may not. It is actually done so. And then you've got this kind of broader beyond Western Europe and North America G20, who are going to be meeting soon. What might we expect coming out of the G20 that would have any effect on the situation in Ukraine?
So to your first point, Chris, yes, NATO is now stronger than it's been in the last 3 decades. And it's expanded. So the whole strategic purpose that was stated by President Putin has backfired. We have Finland and Sweden joining, 2 countries that avoided joining NATO for the entirety of the Cold War. The G20, and I'm sure many people know what it is, but for those that aren't, it is the top 20 economies in the world. So it is a very significant meeting. It's been around for quite a while, but it does include China and Russia. The Russian president, President Putin, can't travel there because he's under international indictment for war crimes by the ICC, which is the same reason why he couldn't go to South Africa to attend what's called the BRICS. It's kind of another group that's formed, not necessarily in opposition to the G20, but certainly separate. Now, the problem that we've seen already, and to your point, is President Xi is not attending the G20, although he did attend just weeks ago, BRICS. So that sends a message. We don't know exactly why, but it could be he's trying to send a message to the West that he's looking for other avenues for his economy. It could be that he doesn't want to answer the tough questions on Ukraine and his continued support for Russia. And there's other issues like the border dispute he has with India. And India is, of course, in the G20, and they're hosting this G20. But what does it mean for the war in Ukraine? Well, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion, again, with the wealthiest countries in the world about why we need to support Ukraine, not just for the purpose of Ukraine, but every country in the world benefits, which is called the international rules-based order. Every country benefits. And part of that means you can't just invade another country. We have rules, we have international borders we've all agreed to. A lot of smaller countries are also wealthy countries, and they rely on that rule-based order, and not just them, but every other country in the world to accept that it is unacceptable that a country should just decide that they're stronger and then take over another country's territory. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion with the US and our NATO partners and other countries like Japan, for example, and South Korea, who are going to want to talk about how important this is and how important it is for the international community to keep supporting Ukraine. So it sends a clear message to those countries, not just Russia, but also China in regards to Taiwan, for example, that it is not going to be acceptable from the international community just to have countries decide because they're stronger that might makes right, and they can essentially take over countries because they can.
Well, thank you very much, Mick Mulroy from the Lobo Institute based in Whitefish, Montana. Thanks as always, for your very keen insight on the issues of the day, on Ukraine and other international security issues. Thanks also for helping us make sense of why this matters to us, especially. So much appreciated there. And thanks again to our very generous sponsors at the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Allegiance, Stockman Bank, and Clearwater Credit Union. So Mick, look, we'll see you again in another week or two, and let's stay on top of this and help us all understand a little bit better what's going on behind the headlines. Till then, be well. See you. Bye-bye.